Hello YouTube, welcome to my full top lane difficulty tier list. This is going to be based on the champions that are the hardest to play, not based on whether or not it's actually good to climb with them. For example, some champions are really hard and have very little reward. Some champions are very easy and have a shit ton of reward. So first up we have Aatrox, who I'm going to put in A tier, which is probably going to be like hard, you know, like pretty hard. He is surprisingly difficult because even though you can just kind of auto people to death once you're ahead, most of the time you're going to need to land your sweet spots. Riot has basically buffed Aatrox over the course of years to make it so that his sweet spots do way more damage, and that highly tests your spacing, and that is one of the hardest fundamental to learn. He has a shit ton of skill expression, super duper hard champion. In fact, very hard. I'd say Akali is hard. I think, hot take, she is harder mid lane than she is top lane. Because top lane, Akali Shroud is the most busted ability in the game. Like, every auto attacker, what do you do once Akali presses W? Bruh, she just presses W and you can't hit her. Spacing's still important. She still has a fair bit of mechanics check, and she is pretty bad for your team comp, but just for lane, I'd say she is hard. I think at best is like on the low end of very hard. Compared to champs like Riven and Aurelia and other hyper-mechanical champions, she isn't that bad. Spacing is still very important on her. Very important. You have to know how to use your cooldowns effectively, since early on you have very long CDs, but you scale very well. Super scary champion to play against. Also, quick plug, I'm streaming this live on Twitch, so if you want to watch me on Twitch, it'll be linked in the description below. Aurora is easy. I think she is maybe the easiest ranged top laner in the entire game. She is a complete monster, and she's still a very safe blind pick. No matter what Riot does, they can't seem to remove her out of top lane, and I think it is a damn shame. I think Camille's on the top end of hard. Her mechanics aren't crazy. Spacing matters a lot. Your matchup understanding needs to be perfect, and I think she's not in a great state. But assuming she's in like slightly a better state, like Riot fixes her up a little bit, maybe gives her a buff or two, I don't think she is very hard. Like comparatively to Abyss and Aatrox, I think your spacing doesn't have to be as on point. And the timing on her Q isn't a super difficult mechanic. Her gank setup's easily accessible. So while a very strong champion, not as hard as people say she is. Cassio, while an absurdly hard mid laner, is just an average top laner. Ranged tops tend to be pretty easy comparatively to when you put them mid lane, and Cassio is no exception. Your miasma cuts a lot of top laners. It's not very fun to play into. It's just, she's not the champion everyone thinks she is, you know? Mid lane, yes. Top lane, no. Shogat's easy. He's a very simple tank. He's very forgiving. He scales very well, infinite HP, true damage pointing to like execute that doesn't, you know, buttloads of damage scaling with HP and AP, a billion builds you can go, one of the best minion farming abilities in the game with his Q, free sustain, it's hard to bully him, super solid champion. Not the best blind in the game, you know, it's not fun to play Cho'Gath into Gwen, for example, but super duper easy, in my opinion. I think Darius is the top of average. He has a fair bit of skill expression. You know, actually hitting people in team fights can be quite tricky because you're quite easily kiteable. But you just hit people. Your laning phase is pretty straightforward. Great for learning the game. I don't think he's brainless, but super easy. A lot of skill expression on that champion. Mundo is at the bottom of easy for maybe the easiest character in the entire game. Super brainless, ranged farming tool, scales like a monster. Just not a champion that's like even remotely close to any other champion in terms of difficulty. I think Mundo is the easiest champion in the entire game, maybe bar none. I'm struggling to think of one that's easier. I think he's like easier even than Garen, Annie, like super duper brainless champ. I think Fiora is the bottom of the top 5 hardest top laners. Maybe I'll move her down if I think there's other top laners that take her place, but the skill expression on this champion is genuinely absurd. She is a very effective champion for climbing, but by God, there is so much you can do on her. She's not one of the champions that you can just throw her in a team fight and you can be effective on her. She requires precision and a lot of patience. But if you get good at her, she is a complete 1v9 machine. This is a difficulty tier list, to clarify. So, top 5 difficulty, very hard, hard, average, easy. Gangplank is, in my opinion, the hardest top laner in the game. I've talked a fair bit about Gangplank, but it basically sums to he kills you very, very fast, but you have to be very good with him to access his strengths. He is very bad from behind. You need to dominate lane. Your spacing has to be on point. You have a ability that is very inconsistent because other people can disable it, so you have to have better internal timing than other League players. That's not easy. He is a ton of skill expression. What items to build, what runes to go, how to play certain matchups, wave management, the list goes on. Garen is going to join Mundo. I said Mundo's easier than Garen, and that's true, but Garen is still very easy. He's very forgiving. As far as top laners go, you just kind of bonk people with your sword, you spin, that's it. I think Gnar is very hard. I think Gnar is very, very hard. Managing your anger meter is not fun, especially in solo queue when random fights break out and you really want to be in Mega Gnar for certain team fights. Your spacing has to be on point, and like, you are technically a ranged top laner, but you're like the fakest ranged top laner in the game. Your range is quite low. You can auto people, and in the time it takes for your auto to go out, they can pull you or just auto you in general, and it's not fun. Like, if Gnar is standing in range of Darius pull when he autos, he's gonna get murdered. I think Gragas is in the middle of hard. Gragas has a ton of skill expression. There's a lot of builds you can go, so he's very flexible, but he's not the hardest. Once you get through early lane, which is the hardest part of Gragas' game, you just are smooth sailing most of the time and you neutralize most matchups. He's a very good blind pick. Pretty solid champion, I'd say. I think Gwen is very hard. There's a lot of very hard top laners. Gwen W is one of the trickiest abilities in the entire game to manage, and if you're just picking Gwen into Cho'Gath, she's not hard. But if you're picking her as a blind pick, the champion can get stomped early game. She is so weird because you will go from feeling totally useless pre-1 item to very Thanos post-1 item. I have no idea where to put Heimerdinger, because on one hand, Heimerdinger is useless from behind, and nobody plays him, so he does require skill. On the other hand, you just put turrets and run around in turrets. I think he's one of the least popular champions in the entire game. If any Heimerdinger OTPs want to correct me, I'm going to put him at, like, the middle of hard. If anybody disagrees with me, just, like, let me know. I'd say Alawi's average. Landing your E can be quite tricky once people actually know how to dodge your E, and that's going to happen the second you hit maybe Platinum. She's definitely a low elo stomper. Definitely not fun to play against in low elo. But if you're out of low elo, you know, she is not the hardest. Pretty average, I'd say. I think Aurelia is also top 5. Her matchups are really bad. Like, her mid lane Aurelia has very good matchups, but you kind of scuff your team comp. Top lane Aurelia is much better for team comp and probably much better to actually, you know, win games on. But, like, then you're playing into some of the worst matchups in the game, dude. Like, on God. You know, Aatrox isn't that bad. Playing into some of these other champions like Malphite is, Malphite, Jax, like Renekton's not fun. These matchups are not fun for Aurelia. She has a ton of skill expression. Your mechanics have to be on point. Genuinely one of the most disturbing champions in League of Legends. Like, in terms of actually trying to climb with her. I say Jax is the top of hard. He is a very solid champion for defining how, like, the benchmark for very hard, right? If you are harder than Jax, you are a hard champion. Yes, you could just jump on people mid-game, but your early laning requires so much precision, so much finesse, and so much grace to actually handle, and a lot of people don't understand that. You know, people are just like, oh my god, Jax, ooga booga, but that is not at all what Jax does. If you just play Jax as an ooga booga champion jump on people, you will get murdered. There's an argument for Jace to be in top 5 hardest, and I think I agree with it. Jace's spacing is insane, and if you're not utilizing both forms, you are playing Jace 100% incorrectly. Hammer form is a necessary part of Jace's kit. You can't play him like a ranged champion. He is very vulnerable to dying. He has incredible skill expression, and he requires you hit all of your abilities to be useful, or you'll die instantly and be more useless than every other top laner in the entire game, maybe combined. K'Sante is one of those champions that his skill ceiling is quite high, admittedly. He is hard. He is probably one of the hardest tanks. but I don't actually think his skill floor is that high anymore. I think Riot's made him a lot more forgiving, and although you can just fall off of a cliff mid-game if you don't utilize your mid-game strength, I don't actually think, for the average player, he's that absurdly hard to play. To climb with, sure, like, maybe above Akali and Camille, but I don't think he's, like, harder than Ambessa, Gwen, Aatrox. I just don't. He's fun, but I don't think he's that hard. I think Kayle is easy. Or, like, the bottom of average. In lower elos, she is very easy because people don't know how to punish your lane, and then she scales into a 1v9 monster with Swifties and 100 trillion move speed, and there's, like, nothing you can do. If you're playing Kayle in higher elos, it does get quite a bit trickier, but I've seen so many Kayle players make it work that I, like, refuse to believe that this champion is actually super hard when she's sitting permanently at a 52% win rate. Kennen is hard. Kennen is really hard. You will just get one-shot in teamfights, and the second people realize that exhaust beats your champion, every single champion starts to take exhaust, and it's really miserable. You're not really a lane bully. He feels good to play in lane, but you're not really a lane bully like you used to be. Like, it's actually quite hard for you to just destroy people in lane if they don't know what you do, you know? Like, if you're just sucking Kennen's 5th auto attack, which, by the way, Kennen has a passive where his 5th auto attack does extra damage, but nobody knows this. But once people start to play around it, it's really hard to actually win games on him. Like, you have to find flanks and fights consistently, and that's not easy in solo queue. That's not easy at all. But you do ton of damage. A ton of damage. I have no idea where to put Kled. I'm gonna put Kled at the top of average, but, like, Kled is an enigma to me. I have no clue how somebody plays Kled. I have none. I'll be honest. I don't know what this champion does. I see Bells 1v9 on him. I'm sure he has skill expression. I have no clue what his, like, reference points are. I know he's, like, pretty strong in lane. I know he's, like, pretty strong mid-game and he falls off end-game. Besides that, is he hard? Is he easy? I have no idea. He's only played by OTPs. And the Bells. So, like, this is the one ranking I am so unsure about. Like, I'll put him at bottom of hard out of respect, and I'll bump Hyver down. How about that? Malphite is easy. There's actually a surprising amount of setups with Malphite. Like, you can go W-Max, E-Max, and Q-Max in a ton of matchups. But you're also only using him as a counter pick in good games. And if you're blinding Malphite, you're going to get hit with the most abysmal matchups. You know, Vladimir, Sylas, AP champs in general that aren't named Kayle. And they're really, really unfun. But that being said, he is very easy. You are people, and as long as you're not going AP, he is very strong. People are mind-controlled into thinking that Malphite's a champion that needs to build AP when tank is 100 times better, in my opinion. Mordekaiser's also very easy. I'll put him at the top of easy. No. I still think Aurora requires more spacing than he does. But, again, very simple champion. I bonk people with my Q, and then they are bonked, and that is that. Super simple, super easy. Very clear reference points. You play with your ultimate ability. You're strong early game. You want to beat people up. You kind of fall off mid to late game. Good champion to climb with. Guess where Nasus is going? Take a wild guess. Nasus is going in the easy tier. Where in the easy tier? Probably below Mord. I think he's easier than Mord. You just hit people with Q. That's it. His champion is so simple. Very, very brainless. He counters Kennen, so there's that. If you want to play Nasus into Kennen, you can do that. But other than that, you just farm with Q. That's it. You're just a Q farmer. That's what Nasus does. Bonk, 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 bonk. I'd say Olaf is the top of average. In a good Olaf game, you pick up your axes, you run people down lanes, and it's pretty smooth sailing. In a bad Olaf game, you get kited, people ghost away from you and take phase rush, and it's miserable. It just depends on how hard of a game it is for Olaf. Mechanically, he's quite simple. He does have a fair bit of skill expression, so I'm going to put him in average. I think all the champions above him are harder, because his game plan is just run at people and run them down with your axes and ultimate ability. I'd say Ornn is probably the tank that takes the second most skill expression. I'd put him at top of average. Like, Cassante is more, but Ornn can do a fair few funny things. You can one-shot people with your ultimate ability, and that's pretty funny. Like, if you disrespect Ornn damage, it is quite intense. But besides that, he doesn't have the most skill expression. You farm with Q, you proc Brittle, You give your teammates upgrades. As long as you're even or ahead and you don't fall behind, he feels quite good. Pantheon is probably bottom of hard. There's a lot of skill expression with Pantheon. The champion is really cool. He does a ton of damage, but you have to get ahead in lane because his mid-game lull is really unfun compared to other champions. And once you get some items, you feel quite good, but when most champions are sitting on 2 items, Pantheon is not a super strong champion unless you're accelerated. Ooh, where do I put Poppy? I'm thinking middle of hard is a good spot for Poppy. No. I don't think Poppy is bottom of hard. Poppy has a lot of stuff you can do with her. If you've ever watched that Poppy OTP, I forget his name, but he's really talented. You know that there's so many tips and tricks you can do on Poppy. But once you get used to her weird kit, she's not really such a hard champion to play. She's very, very simple, very easy, very clean. She feels quite fun, but she isn't very hard. I'd say Quinn is actually underrated in terms of difficulty. Quinn is brutal if you get behind. But if you get ahead, you just roam and you just push waves and you roam, and her game plan is super, super easy. So all you do is you have to get good at lane, and then once you get good at lane, you have Quinn down pat. Because you also get very easily one-shot and you provide 0 frontline. And that's the role of a top laner normally, is some sort of frontline or some sort of threat. Quinn has threat, but no frontline, which is why I think she's quite hard. Renekton is hard. Renekton's hard. Not super hard, but again, a shit ton of skill expression. Renekton, when to use empowered Q, when to use empowered W, when to trade, is this a good timer, is this a bad timer? Kind of counterintuitively, because of the way your Q works, you're actually okay with like EQing into a big wave, but most top laners are taught like to avoid big waves, so that's a Renekton specific. There's a lot of stuff you can do on him. You know, you can WR to cancel the animation, just a ton of stuff. Super fun. Super fun. I recommend him. Good amount of skill expression. Kind of the ideal top lane, in my opinion. There's a reason he's like a very consistent pro blind. I think Riven's another, completes the trinity of the top 5 hardest top laners. I don't see a top laner here that is harder than Riven, except Gameplay, obviously, but Riven is very hard. She is incredibly rewarding, but she is very, very hard. What Riven does is she runs up to you, whack, 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 whack with Q, and you die. But if you don't know how to do her Q mechanics, oh boy, she's hard. Her spacing is hard. She isn't like Abessa where she just scales. You really need to be ahead of the curve, in my opinion, on Riven. Like, abusing your one-item spike, and if you're not doing that, you're playing her wrong. I think Rumble is also at the, middle of very hard. He's kind of similar to Kennen, where, you do a ton of damage in team fights, but your side laning is quite weak, because you just get one-shot, you are very immobile, and if you aren't doing well in lane, you are useless. There's just better chance to play. You are not consistent frontline. Again, a ton of damage, but very hard, and a lot of skill expression. Ryze is average. I think ranged top laners are so easy compared to playing them mid. In fact, he can join Cassiopeia, where it's so much easier to play Ryze top than it is to play Ryze mid. I still wouldn't advise playing him, but it's so much easier to space and to scale. I think Set is the top of average. There's a lot of skill expression with Set, and I think in lower elos he's pretty easy, but in higher elos, you get kited super duper hard mid-game. It is really hard to play Set when you're not one-shotting people, and you're not ahead, and you're not feeling good. His E spacing and landing E is really important. Using the corner of E to actually grab people is a unexpected spike in terms of difficulty. And a lot of Set players don't do that. So I think in low elos, he's easy. In high elos, he's hard. So I'm going to average him out to average. Shen is... Where is Shen? I think Shen's top of easy. Surprisingly strong early. People don't make use of Shen's very strong early game. And if you actually make use of Shen's very strong early game, he's quite effective. And a lot of Shens make the mistake of ulting bot lane without having teleport and just ruining their lane. But if you avoid doing that, the champ's quite solid. Super awesome champion to play. Singed is... Dude, where the fuck does Singed go? Hard, I guess. He's so weird, dude. He's so weird. You have to know when to proxy. You have to know what setup to take. You have to know what's a good first item. but at the same time, you're just fucking running. Like, his mechanics are so easy, but his game plan is actually surprisingly hard to execute. If you can't get into a proxy and dodge most lanes, the champion is not very useful. Yes, I am aware of 6-spec Singed, and that is not the optimal way to play the champion. I would not recommend playing 6-spec Singed strategy. I think Sion has a lot of skill expression, but it's still, like, average. Next to Ornn, very similar champions, I think. Sion is, I think, more sharp than Ornn is, where there's, like, certain matchups that are much better for Sion and certain matchups that are much worse. There are 3 Sion builds. I think 2 of them are quite good. 1 of them is quite troll. I think AD Sion full AD is generally very bad. I think Tank Sion is very good. I think Bruiser Sion is very good. Especially if you're going, like, Bruiser into Tank. It's very, very strong. But the reason Tank Sion is better is because you get HP. And when you get HP, you want to build resists. This is why resist items are really OP compared to items like Heartsteel on Sion. Heartsteel on Sion is really bad. He doesn't have many HP scalings except his shield. You want to make use of your bulkiness. I think Tahm Kench is the top of easy. I've seen enough Watley to respect him. I'm not going to put him on the Tahm Kench level, but he is very simple mechanically. You just lick people and then you auto them to death. That's it. That is the Tahm Kench agenda. Like, it is that simple. You lick people to death. You are quite weak early game, and if you go the troll build Heartsteel instead of the Chad build Warmogs, you will feel quite bad, but, you know. Mechanically, I don't think anyone's arguing that Tahm Kench is, like, a hard champion or one of the hardest champs in the game. Where does the devil go? Where does the little devil Teemo go? I think Teemo goes maybe middle of average. You know, Teemo is surprisingly hard to play. If you're a normal League player and you get behind him Teemo, you are turbo useless and you have to win lane. Spacing is very important on Teemo, and you also have to have a good knowledge of where the objective is, you know, getting your shrooms set up, because if you don't do that, you're not a useful champion. And you don't contribute frontline. So kind of like Heimer level champion. Trundle. Honestly, he goes lower. He's like a Nasus tier champion. Bonk, 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 bonk. Bonk, 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 you bonk turrets. That's it. And you're strong level 1. And you just sustain to full off of the wave. I'm convinced Trundle takes so little skill. And the cap of Trundle is so much lower than every other champion in the game. Like, if you're the best Trundle in the world, you might be able to hit low challenger, but I don't think you can hit rank 1. I think you're too exploitable. Tryndamere is top of average. There is a lot of stuff you can do with Tryndamere. Like, you can go a variety of setups, grasp, lethal tempo, hail of blades, press the attack. Many options, but he isn't hard. You just auto people. It's just autoing. It's just autoing and spacing. And you just soak resources and hope you're ahead enough in teamfights to make the difference. Urgot. Urgot's quite underrated, I think. I think he's quite underrated. Maybe bottom of hard. Maybe a little above Singed. Nah, below Singed. Urgot is just one of those champions that's like, yo, I will turbo 1v9 games if I'm ahead, and I will be very unkillable if you go the right build. He is super duper derp with Thanos, and he can one-shot you with your ultimate. Or his ultimate, I guess. Not your ultimate. Super good champion. Varus. Where does Varus go? Easy, I guess? Like, I don't think he's skilled. Like, I don't think he's hard. Maybe bottom of average. There is spacing required. But, like, come on, man. The champ is just so degenerate. The way the build works is you go Malignance into Storm Surge. They have nerfed it, so there might be other builds. Maybe you go Dusk and Dawn still. It's like, I don't know, man. It's so cringe. Vayne. Like, these champs are so cringe, but I do have to admit, Vayne is harder to play than Varus. Vayne is a lot harder to play. Again, some matchups are super easy, some matchups are super hard, but really just degenerate champions. Like, oh, Vladimir, one of the other, like, worst champions to play against in top lane. Again, he's average. Harder mid lane than he is top lane. Much harder mid lane than he is top lane. Voli is, like, I think Guaranteer. I think Voli is Guaranteer, unironically. In fact, I think Voli is easier than Garen. I think Voli is easier than Garen. I'll stand by it. I think this champion, yes, he has skill expression, yes, he has skill ceiling, but his skill floor is so low, bro. you run at people, and then you W them, and you call the lightning, and then you jump on their heads, and you're dunking on them. That is Voli's gameplay pattern. There we go. In fact, I will put Warwick in easy because he does not play top lane. In fact, I'm going to add a row below, and we are going to call this row Turbo Brainless. And this is going to be reserved for Volibear. There we go. I feel better. Like, I don't even know if he deserves to be in the same game as these other champions. I'm a rank 1 Volibear hater. Warwick just heals. He doesn't really play the game, honestly. Warwick is just a weird top laner who's, like, not really a top laner. Wukong. I don't know, bro. Where the fuck does Wukong go? Is he hard? Is he easy? He just, like, he hits people with stick. He has this fair amount of skill expression, I think. He's not super popular anymore. His spacing matters quite a bit. You know, bottom of hard. I can see him being hard. I can see there being a lot of skill expression. And maybe top of average. Yasuo top is actually quite hard, I think, compared to mid lane. Whereas Yasuo top, you just lose to every champ in the game, bro. Like, maybe bottom of very hard. Like, you just lose to every champ. Like, so many top laners just shit on Yasuo. Like, obviously you win versus Vlad, but, like, other than that, dude, these matchups are not fun, and you get outscaled. Same with Yone, honestly. They're very similar. Very, very similar. Like, they're just not good top lane. We're ranking difficulty currently. I just don't think they're good top lane. I think they're too hard. Like, he's just not useful. I think he's more respectable than mid lane. I think he's really hard to actually execute on. Like, to actually win on Yone, woof. I think Yorick is top of easy. Very simple. Very, very simple. Like, what else are you doing with Yorick? You're hitting minions, and then you're split pushing. He's better in teamfights than he used to be. And he still has some matchups that are really unplayable, like Aurelia, but if you ban Aurelia, not a hard champion. Good in low elo. Finally, Zahen is... I'd say middle of bottom of hard? Middle of hard? Middle of hard. Zahen's early game is really bad. His early game is really bad. It's all about minimizing. But once you get to that 1 to 2 item spike, you're off to the races. You just have to understand to build Stridebreaker, to minimize early game, and you're golden. He has a lot of skill expression, a lot of stuff you can do. You can involve CC with your ultimate ability. You can, you know, hit multiple people with your E and whatever. But besides that, that's kind of it. That's all the skill expression. Udyr top, I'd say he'd be at the bottom of hard. But yeah, I think that's the tier list. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time. I like the look of this. I don't think I would change much. I like it. There we go. That's the tier list. There's the there's she glows.